So, sometimes we are called to ask the big questions. And that is a fantastic way of making sure that we are living our lives on purpose. Is to say, if this was my last day before, I don't know, I got stolen by space aliens. If this was my last chance to make an impact, if this was my last talk here, it's not, because I already wrote some more. If this was it, would I be okay with what I have created thus far? Would I be able to leave saying, I did my part, I was true to myself, and I raised the consciousness as a whole? I sometimes wonder if that's not the type of question that drew our, I know I grew up calling them founding fathers, but I'm going to start calling them founding folks, to acknowledge the fact that it wasn't just the white landed men who made a big difference in the world in 1776. Excuse me. Obviously, I'm allergic to too much fun. And so I think about what were the questions that were being asked when they said, okay, British Empire, most powerful empire on the planet, and we don't like our position in it. And so we're going to send a letter to Emperor Palpatine, King George, and tell him that this isn't working for us. And this is what we've tried, but, it was kind of like the ultimate Dear John letter, except that it was more of a it's not me, truly, it's you. They had to make a decision about who they were and the legacy they wanted to leave behind. And so in 1776, they declared their independence from their whole identity, really, as British people, as good subjects of a king who, back in those days, they talked about the divine right of kings. Basically, the king's authority came from God. So it was a big deal that they said, this is not working for me. This is not the legacy I choose to leave behind. And yet, according to the psychologist Abraham Maslow, belonging, knowing that who we are within a group, is secondary only to things like food and shelter and physical safety. After that, if we don't belong to a group, something goes a little sideways for us. It's why exile and, bless you, shunning were big punishments back in the day. They still are. Have you ever suddenly not been welcome in your circle of friends? You kind of wonder, was it something I said? I'm not sure. Or even if you do know what it is that they disapprove of, it can be kind of gut-wrenching to suddenly not belong to the group that you started with. So Ernest Holmes, who is the founder of our philosophy, wrote a book called This Thing Called You. And this thing came out came out in 40, no, wait a minute. I just looked at the number. Now I can't see the number. There it is. This came out in 1948. And it's considered kind of a companion book to something called This Thing Called Life. The story behind This Thing Called Life is that Ernest Holmes came out with a textbook. And then his practitioners, his licensed professional practitioners, looked at him and said, we learned from you and we don't understand the textbook. Could you write something a little easier? So he wrote This Thing Called Life, explaining the energy of life itself. Not in 50 words or less, because, this is us. It's now published as The Art of Life. But this is the companion book that came later that talks about this thing called you. Who are we? Why are we here? how are we going to know when we ask those big questions that what we did with these lives was actually what the divine within us would want us to do? So who do we belong to is a good starting question. And Ernest Holmes wrote in this book, your soul belongs to the universe. Your mind is an outlet through which the creative intelligence of the universe seeks fulfillment. So if you want to know whose you are, you belong to the infinite power that came up with the idea for stars and roses and, yes, the duck-billed platypus. Yes, she has a sense of humor. Not me, God, although I have one too. Although that's a whole conversation with a different therapist. So if we're going to say that this is part of who we are, if we are made in the image and likeness of the divine, if we are part of the God stuff that took form as this entire universe, what does that mean? I mean, because I know if I'm a Sibley, which I am, that has certain things that come with it. That sense of humor, for instance. The ability to make therapists retire, for another one. Growing up in the military. I belong to this group of people, and we have this shared experience and these shared values. If I say I'm a religious scientist, which is one of the names for the people who practice this philosophy, be it that from back when we were called a religious science church. We are now called a Center for Spiritual Living, but I don't want to be a spiritual liver, because without the bacon, that just doesn't work. Oh, I so had a point a minute ago. If you're part of the universe, what does that mean? Emma Curtis Hopkins, who's another wonderful philosopher and teacher, said that if you can't deal with the word God, if that has too much baggage on it for you, add a O. And start talking about the word good. There is good for you in the universe, and you ought to have it. That good belongs to you already. It is not to be questioned. It is not something you can get rid of. It is not something you can even mess up no matter how hard you try. The poet Browning said that a man can desecrate but never lose the divine spark. So let's just start with the idea that you are a holy being. That you too are a Christ, an avatar of that thing that is beyond words. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties and it's all my fault. You're part of the divine being. You're part of something so much greater than yourself and so much more powerful than you give yourself credit for as a human being. Now, the nature of the universe is to create. That is what it does. It contemplates an idea, and that's moved into form. So if the universe is always creating, if God is always creating, then we are always creating. We are creating our world. Now, when the founding folks decided to create this democracy, there were a few people less than happy about it. Like all of the investors who had invested in the colonies. Like good King George, not so happy about the letter he got. Just because we're creating a life that works for us doesn't mean that everybody else will be perfectly happy about it. Nor does it mean that we have to sacrifice being true to ourselves in order to make everybody else happy. There is a happy medium in there somewhere, yes? There's a way to be in balance. So What Ernest Holmes would say is that anything that adds life to the greater whole is what we used to call the will of God. He said he is often asked, how would we know right from wrong? If we're always creating, how do we know we're creating the right thing? And so they would say, how will I know right from wrong? And his answer was, you won't. You already do. Because you are made of the divine intelligence of good itself, you cannot help but know when you're off track and when you're not. When you're absolutely in the flow and living your purpose, you know it. I mean, come on, don't we? We know. When we get up and go to that job we hate every day, we know full well that's not what we want to do with our lives. We know full well when we get into it with somebody we really, really love, but harsh words are spoken, we know full well that's not who we are or who they are, right? And so we come back to listening to our highest self, listening to that quiet voice within us, that divine spark that we might wander off from, but we can never really get rid of. We come back to that and we say, okay, so what would good do now? What would love do now? What would I do now if I was in my right mind? And by right mind, I mean my one part of the one mind, as opposed to acting from fear or acting from a lack of joy, a sense of limitation. Do you know that once upon a time, there were people who believed that democracy would be a horrible, horrible idea? Plato wrote about it. When the founding folks wrote the Declaration of Independence and began this great experiment, we became the only democracy on the planet at the time. And Plato and a guy by the name of Edmund Burke, who was one of the great philosophers of his time, said that this was a really bad idea, that we could not be trusted with that much freedom. That the quote-unquote great unwashed were going to muck it up. So let's dial that back a little bit because this feels important to me. We have a tendency, culturally, to believe that people given freedom, people given resources, will muck it up. Why? Because we don't trust us. Because we don't know who we are. We don't know whose we are. We know that it's scary to have too much power because what will I do with it? Which is why I always get questions like, well, but what if you misuse the power to create? Eventually it will all fall down about your ears because the divine within you will destroy it from within. The divine within you doesn't want to go on a spending spree with your spiritual capital in a way that hurts other people. You will destroy anything that you make out of fear because of that fear. And that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. I mean, I have bought clothes out of fear, thinking I wouldn't have anything, and I would get home and be like, oh dear God, I can't wear that in public. Why did I put my energy into buying those? I've created entire chunks of my life out of fear. I created a marriage out of fear. And yes, we ended that quickly. It actually showed up, the divorce showed up the same month as my master's in marriage and family counseling. Because we learn, and what we create, we can then create anew. We can do something different. And so that which is within you is always pushing you to create more good. Well, the people who said democracy wouldn't work didn't have that faith. They were working from fear that the people out there would muck it up. And yet, over time, they say the proof of the pudding is in the eating of it. At this time, there are 123 democracies in the world, and there's only 192 countries. There's nothing so powerful as an idea whose time has come. Thank you, Victor Hugo. According to Business Insider, some 3 billion people, or 43% of the global population, enjoyed full political rights and civil liberties, while 1.6 billion resided in partly free countries, where there's only limited respect for freedoms in place. This idea of personal freedom, we are evolving into greater personal freedom. We are evolving into a greater trust in this universe. Ernest Holmes once wrote, "When we learn to trust the universe, we shall be happy, prosperous, and well." When we learn to trust the universe, which is part of trusting ourselves, we shall be happy, prosperous, and well. So what's it going to take for us to start recognizing who and what we really are, and shifting from creating a world that is fear-based to a world that is based in love? Because we have a choice. We can be pushed by pain or pulled by a vision. We have that choice. But Holmes also said that we've learned all we need to from suffering. So what if we were able to learn this about this world and ourselves out of our joy, out of the power and peace that is actually our birthright? If we were to trust ourselves and create a life that we really would love to live, what would that look like? Holmes also wrote, "The race is growing into a broader divinity from age to age, as more and more of reality, capital R reality, opens before its onward march and its eternal progress." The race is growing into a broader divinity, and we belong to the universe. Which brings us back to one of our most basic premises. And the way I remember this, the thing I use to remind myself, how many religious scientists does it take to screw in a light bulb? There's only one. There's only one of us. There is only one power and presence in the universe, and we're part of it. So whatever you need to do in order to remind yourself of that, go ahead and do that. Walk around like this all day. I'm sure you'll get questions, but it'll be your moment to teach a great teaching. Make sure you use this finger and not the other one. That'll get you a different reaction. So if we're all one, what about those people that I don't want to be one with? You know, those people with the wrong religion or political persuasion or, heck, means of making meatloaf. They do it wrong. And the things they believe are wrong, and I don't like them. I'm the only one with people like that on my universe, right? I'm the only one with idiots out there breathing my air. Part of being one with the entire universe is that we have to take a moment and be one with all of it. All of it. Everything within you is divine. That part of you that you hope nobody ever finds out about, that too is divine. That too is a part of you that you can learn to work with instead of trying to smush down. That you can absolutely embrace and use that part of you to do good things out in the world. But first you have to be willing to have that be part of who you are. You also can do this practice and do this mental experiment by looking at the world outside of us. So when we sang the earlier song about I see the beauty in you and I see the power in you, we purposely, Jackson and I talked about how far to push this one, but we put some images up there that are meant to remind you about some of the stuff going on out in the world. Some of the stuff where there's evidence that we are acting out of our fear and our sense of separation. And so I believe that there was a Border Patrol person, and there was an immigrant family. How do we take all of those and remember that we're all one? I'm one with both of them. I'm one with the person I like the least on this planet, and I'm also one with the world's most adorable nieces and nephews. Sorry, guys, they're fine. I am one with everybody who is in pain today, and I am one with people who are celebrating, whatever they might be celebrating. So we're going to do an exercise today that helps us pull back into that oneness. And it's a meditation, so if you're comfortable, close your eyes. If you keep your eyes open and make faces at me, please know that I'm making faces back. So beginning by trusting who we really are. Beginning by going within and knowing that there is only light within us. And those obstacles that create our shadow selves, those are just a reflection of the light that we might be having trouble seeing right now. And so in this moment, I'm going to ask you to think about somebody who is really, really easy for you to love. I'm not going to give you their name because you know who they are. They came into your mind just a moment ago. Somebody you just adore. The one it's really easy to see God in. Just hold them in your heart. Be with them for a moment and claim joy for them. Claim love and power and peace. Claim the infinite universe for them. And send out your trust in the divine within them. Not anything they're doing in particular, but who their essence is. And when you're filled with that knowledge and with that sensation of that overwhelming sense of trust and love in the divine with them, move to somebody who is perhaps neutral in your life. Whoever served your dinner at the restaurant last week. Whoever was driving beside you on the highway. A neighbor whose name you know, but whose life maybe you're not terribly invested in. And see the same bright truth about them. Know that their soul has the same magnificence within it and is just as trustworthy as that person that is so easy to love. Spend a moment acknowledging that perfection. And now, someone who is challenging to love. Whether it's someone with whom you're in personal conflict, someone who you used to be friends with, but don't really feel like knowing anymore. That person, too, is a Christ in form. And if you need to, go back and remember that feeling of the easy person to love and trust. And then redirect it toward that more challenging person. And just see them as the divine beings that they all are. And finally, perhaps there is an institution or a person that really feels like they have caused harm to you or harm to someone you love. Perhaps there's a group in the world right now that you see as ignorant or mean or even dangerous. Spend a moment just acknowledging, to the degree that you're able, that they too are part of that infinite universe to which we all belong. Whether it's a political figure, an institution like a religion or the military or a government of any country. Spend a moment now and just call back into the oneness, the essence of those people. Remembering that we don't ever have to earn the divine's love. Allow that love to flow through you to them. Healing whatever it is in their lives that is going on for them right now that might cause them to strike out of fear or hatred. And as you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes and come back into this place. Today we declare our independence from a sense of separation. Today we declare our independence from a sense that perhaps we could be separated from our own divine good. Our independence from the very, very false thought that there is something we can do to keep God from loving us or loving the world through us. And in this moment, we are moving now into prayer, because I seem to be going there anyway. We declare our independence and our own perfection. We declare our good and our oneness with everyone we have ever loved. Everyone who has ever served us or loved us, whether we knew it or not. Today we declare independence from the old belief that somehow we're not worthy. And I declare the absolute truth of our being, which is that we are that. Individually and collectively, we are the divine presence here and now. And trusting that, trusting the individual good and the unassailable truth about ourselves and our divinity, we absolutely choose to create according to our nature, according to the joy that lives within each and every one of us. And from that joy, we create a world that works for everyone, where no one is left out, where we are all fully welcome and recognized as the Christ and the Buddhas that we all are. I give thanks for that truth. I recognize that truth with every cell within me, with every bit of divine energy that is now giving me life. And I recognize it on behalf of all sentient beings. Oh, and I just rest in that, knowing that all we had to do was recognize it. All we had to do was come home to what we really are. And Spirit, the divine law, is now moving it into form so that we can see it in our world. For this and so much more, I give thanks. I call it good and very good, and so it is. Thank you. And now I'll ask you to stand and sing with me as we allow all of that good and all of that love to wash over us.